This is the Real Estate Investing Abundance Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Allen. I know you're excited to get into today's show, but I have a very exciting announcement to share with you before moving to the show. We've just launched a complimentary and comprehensive webinar that, among other things, shows you how to legally use passive real estate investing to reduce your taxes, recession-proof your nest egg, and take the sting out of inflation. If you are curious to learn more, go to stevetucker.com/webinar. It is complimentary and only takes a couple of minutes of your time. Once again, that is stevetucker.com/webinar. I'll see you in the webinar. Enjoy today's show. Hello, enlightened investors. Welcome back to Real Estate Investing Abundance. I'm your host, Dr. Allen. I'm delighted to be with you again today. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to tap into the wisdom of 42 years of real estate investing? Well, today we are going to do exactly that with our guest, Joel Friedland. He is an industrial real estate syndicator with over 40 years of experience and nearly 100 acquisitions in the Chicagoland area, totaling 3 million square foot. On his team are more than 200 investors. Joel brings to us his unique philosophy on debt ratios and preservation of capital, and we are going to have a very interesting conversation today with Joel, not just on real estate, but what it's like to be a real person and human being in the real estate investing industry. So Joel, take us into the show and share a memorable experience that helped you to be who you are today.
Well, I will tell you something that is extremely important to me, and it's more important than real estate. And that is how to avoid what I've learned is how to avoid falling into a depression filled with shame and with regret. What happened to me, Alan, is in 2008, I had acquired hundreds of millions of dollars worth of real estate with hundreds of investors. And I was a typical real estate syndicator. You could have compared me to almost anybody else. And I would have said, yeah, I'm just a typical real estate syndicator. And a bunch of typical real estate syndicators in 2008 got killed. And I know you and I have talked about this. You've had your issues also with the same kinds of problems of literally falling into a depression and having a hard time coming out because we had so much going for us. And then we made some giant mistakes, or maybe we didn't make mistakes, but didn't understand what the market could do to us and how to safely protect ourselves and our investors. You see that couch back there with the Chicago Cubs blanket? In 2008, when Lehman Brothers went out of business, I remember that was the day this happened. I had 50 industrial buildings. I had many, many investors. And in one day, I got wiped out of almost all of my equity. And I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I had never had an experience like that. I had been through 3 prior cycles, 1981 when interest rates were almost 20%, and the Gulf War, and then right after 9/11. But this was 2008 was like nothing that had ever happened to anybody since the Depression, as you know. And they called the Depression a depression for a good reason. So I spiraled downward, and I felt like I couldn't fix it. The problem was bigger than I was. It was the whole market. It was the whole world. It was a global crisis. Mm-hmm. And so my depression was an emotional disaster for me and for my family. My kids witnessed it. My wife watched it. My parents were both living. By the way, my dad was a psychologist, my mom a therapist. And I couldn't get up from the couch because I thought I had lost everybody's money. I thought that my net worth, which was very positive up until that time, went negative. And I learned a lot of lessons from that. And that was probably the most pivotal thing that changed my life forever. So that's my story. I know that that's not typically how you start a podcast where somebody tells you how they got into it when they cut lawns when they were 14 years old and they were a great salesman, and then they went out and sold a bunch of real estate and bought a house. My story doesn't go that way. It's a whole different story.
Well, yeah, Joel, I can certainly relate to the experience that you went through because it was 2008 that wiped me out. took me into a negative balance as well. And that, of course, the financial setback, of course, is devastating enough. But like you, I experienced major depression, and it was, I don't know, triply, doubly hard for me because here I had a degree in psychology, a background in counseling, and I told myself, I guess, that I should know better than to fall into these kinds of depressions. So I heaped shame upon top of shame and upon top of depression. It took a really long time to come to terms with that and to start getting myself back on track. It was a humiliating experience in so many, many different ways.
It's lucky that we're still here because I in Chicago, it's a big city. I have a lot of friends in real estate, and I have a few less friends in real estate because of what happened to them in their case. They didn't make it. Suicide's a real thing. And I actually know that when someone is as devastated as you and I were, there's only two ways you can go. The one way is death, and the other way is back up. The trouble is figuring out how to go back up and knowing deep in your heart that there's a future, and looking for the optimism and looking for the lessons in what we learned. I was reading the paper one day back when I was in my depression. I couldn't eat. I lost so much weight. What a diet. I call it the depression diet. I was about 30 pounds over where I wanted to be. By the time I was coming out of my depression, I was 15 pounds under that. So I had 45-pound differential. Nothing tasted good. I had no appetite. I had no appetite for anything, nothing fun. I couldn't do my normal things that I used to do. It was horrible. But you and I are here. We came out of it. And that's resilience. And so I give you a lot of credit, and I give myself a lot of credit. I'm going to pat myself on the back. We worked really hard to come out of it. And here we are doing a real estate podcast in 2023. And I look back and I'm so grateful to be here and to have learned the lessons.
Well, yes, suicide is an actual and a real thing. And having worked in counseling, I know that it's a real thing, but I also know that it gets very, very serious when people really start planning on that. And I was to that point. I was investigating processes for effectively taking care of a suicide.
Me too. By the way, me too. My parents and my wife shared, see that chair? They sat in that chair watching me because they were afraid that I'd go in the bathroom and theoretically take a whole bunch of pills. That's what they were afraid of. So they took turns keeping me calm, watching me and giving me encouragement and saying how awful it would be for them and for my family and our legacy. And suicide is a really terrible option. We have friends whose children have died that way. It ruins the family.
Yes.
And so really glad to say that here you and I are, but I want to talk about what we're here to talk about a little bit more, which is real estate. I determined what helped me come out of the depression was a combination of things. I had some medications. I tried every medication there was. Most of them didn't work. And finally, my doctor threw his arms up and I went and got another psychiatrist, and he had an idea and he came up with a medication that actually was a miracle for me. And I started coming out of it. And I had counseling with a therapist who was a social worker who I saw every week. I know why they have a couch. I couldn't sit up. I was so devastated, anxious, and depressed that I asked him if I could lie down on the couch because I couldn't even sit up because of that sick feeling you have. So I came out of it slowly. It took years because my real estate portfolio was devastated for years. 2008 didn't end in 2009. 2008 didn't end until, for me, 2017. It was a lot of work to come out of it. And what I learned is this: the way for me to avoid shame is to make really good decisions. If something goes wrong after I've made a very well-informed decision where I've done due diligence and I've talked to other people and I've gotten opinions, if something still goes wrong after that, I don't need to be ashamed of it. I need to be aware of what steps need to be taken to move forward. And do you know Brene Brown? Have you ever listened to her or watched her? She's a researcher on the topic of shame, and she did a TED talk that went viral because everybody has this, even if they're not in real estate. Everybody has some level of something back to their childhood or something that they're embarrassed about, that they don't talk about, or that they can't be authentic until they admit and put the shame and the authentic feelings that they have out there. Once you put it into the light of day, they can go away. But when it's deep inside of you, it can't go away. So getting back into real estate, I made a decision that I couldn't possibly go back into another period like that. And I looked at all of the decisions that I had made that led to the point where 2008 was able to devastate me and my family and my investors. I will tell you the end of the story is everything that I worked on that could have been lost, I got back to work and I worked incredibly hard and I saved it and we still have it. Most people that I know went bankrupt and started over, and I couldn't tolerate doing that. So I went through the hell of dealing with every problem with every property and solving them. But here's the answer for me: take very little risk. And I actually, you're going to probably think this is stupid, or people listening to this are going to think, who would do this? And the answer is deals with no debt, zero debt, no mortgages. Because if 2023 turns into 2008, I have buildings that if the tenants called me and said, this is devastating, I can't pay the rent, I have no lender breathing down my neck. My investors are protected against a bankruptcy of a tenant who can't pay the full rent. So let's say we're getting an 8% return, cash on cash yield on a property, which here's one. This is my typical syndication book. We do it online and we also have physical books. This is an 8% deal, an investment in a Chicago area manufacturing building of 33,000 feet, 2.7 million, all cash, 40 investors, no debt.
Wow.
And that's my MO. And my investors are like-minded. The reason that I'm able to syndicate these deals without debt is because I work much harder than somebody who borrows 70 or 80%, because I got to go find that 70 or 80% of the money from actual people who believe in me and trust me and believe in the deal that I found for them. So that's what's happened to me is I've become an extreme risk-averse safety man. And it's funny, I don't look for young investors to try to teach them how to invest. I don't want them. I'm not interested in that. I want wealthy people who are not trying to make a fortune with unrealistic promises. I want people who want to keep their money because they've worked really hard to get it, and who want a great yield on a long-term basis that goes up theoretically, although sometimes it can go down, where the value of the property goes up theoretically, although sometimes it can go down. And I want those people who are like-minded, who want a safe deal where their money is protected by the strong balance sheets of having high reserves in the bank. I'm keeping at this moment a ton of money we have 16 buildings and I've got $8 million in cash reserves, which is a lot. It's a lot.
Yes.
But no debt with high reserves means safe, because I'm not going back on the couch for making stupid decisions. And this is really strange that you're going to hear something maybe you haven't heard before. I think a lot of people are deal junkies. And you know what that is? That's called compulsive gambling. A deal junkie is a compulsive gambler. You shouldn't be an anything junkie. If you're an anything junkie, you need to go to a 12-step program and get better and get rid of your character flaws, because anyone who's addicted to something and they're so obsessed and focused on it, you have a degree in psychology, right? I mean, this is something that's bad and it's very dangerous. So I'm the opposite of a gambler. I won't even go into a casino anymore. I used to go to casinos all the time. I've drawn a line. I don't gamble. I don't even gamble on the golf course anymore, even in a friendly game, because I've drawn that line, because that couch is off limits for me. I need to make good decisions that are safe decisions on behalf of my investors and on behalf of me. I don't know if that resonates with you or not.
Enlightened investors, if you haven't done so already, be sure and click that like button and also click that share so others can take advantage of the content. And finally, Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single one of our upcoming episodes. Well, it absolutely resonates with me. As we were talking before the show, we were talking about the fact that I am not currently purchasing any properties, and one reason is because I have developed a real aversion to risk, and I am only interested in deals that will produce a reasonable cash flow. I always hope for appreciation, but I am never, ever going to account on that happening because you cannot predict the future. And hoping for appreciation is, to me, it's just gambling on an uncertainty that may or may not come to pass. So I'm only interested in cash flowing deals. And what I have not figured out, which you obviously have, is how to do that with zero debt, because so much in real estate depends upon that aspect of leverage. And so how is it that you have figured out how to do these deals with zero debt?
Okay. I'll get back into my background a little bit. When I started in real estate in Chicago, I was 22 years old. I graduated from the University of Michigan, and I was introduced to a family that was not my family. Their last name is Podolsky, father named Milt, and his sons Steve and Randy and daughter Bonnie. They owned 84 industrial buildings in the Chicago area. It was 6 million square feet, and they hired me to be a leasing agent. And I went door to door to door to door to fill up their 10 vacancies that they hired me to lease when I was 22. It was 1981. Interest rates were 17% that year, and nobody was looking to move. They were looking to stay in business. Companies in industrial buildings, they manufacture products, they distribute products, or they're a service business. And I'd go door to door and I'd say, hey, I've got a building 5 doors down that's available for lease. Would you like to move? And it was thrilling to meet all these people. It was thrilling to find a tenant and then to bring them to the space and get them excited about moving there when their lease was coming up in the next few months. And I filled up their buildings except for one in that first year. And I'd say I cold called on average 30 companies a day, door to door. That's 150 a week. That's 600 a month. That's 7,000 for the year. Guess what I found? People who wanted to sell their buildings. Some who wanted to sell and lease them back because they needed the cash. So it's a liquidity event when you sell your building, and maybe it lets you stay in business because you put all this money and equity for years into the building. And I met all these people who owned companies or who ran companies or who were executives. And one by one, I built these relationships with people who were much older than I was, because at 22, nobody at my age was running companies. They were just starting to work for their family business or at a new job. Mm-hmm. And this is what I've learned. It still works. I go door to door still just to keep fresh. I don't do it all the time, but I do it a few times a month. I have a son in the business who's 28 and a partner I'm 63. My partner's 20 years younger. And they go door to door to door. And I've got people who work for me in the acquisition side who make phone calls and go door to door. And we find deals because we're relentless. We relentlessly search. We don't wait for them to come to us. I love brokers, but brokers don't bring us these deals, because once a deal's being handled by a broker, it's usually 4 or 5 buyers competing with each other. Mm-hmm. And it becomes a process where the broker's running it and I have no connection with the seller. Mm-hmm. The seller's kept away from us by the broker.
Intentionally.
And where you knock on the door, the seller's right there, and you can go in and have a cup of coffee with them and say, hey, I buy buildings. I'm a really fair landlord. We buy all cash. If you ever get in trouble, I can help you. That's what I say. But then I think this is the key, both in terms of getting investors and finding deals. I don't tell them how great I am. I don't tell them how much I've done. I get to know them. My key thing is, if I can't walk out of a meeting knowing, is the person married? Are they gay? Are they old? Are they young? Are their parents living? Are their kids living? Have they ever had depression? When I walk out of a meeting, I know everything about the person that I possibly can pull out of them, because I give a shit. I want to know them. Mm-hmm. Guess what happens? If I don't buy their building, they become my investor, because, as Dale Carnegie said, interested is interesting. And I keep a book right here. This is my book. And when I get out of a meeting, I don't take notes in the meeting because I think then it's hard to have eye contact and really relate to somebody. But when I get in the car, I write down everything that I learned about the person, and it's mine forever. I know them. So I can call them and I can say, how's Janet doing with the divorce? Or how's it going with your son who's been struggling with anxiety? This changes the world. This is the way it changes the world for them. They don't have anybody else who does that. The other people come in and say, well, I'm very experienced and I'm going to give you an offer of $4 million and the cap rate will be 7%. I don't even get to that until way after I get to know the people. In the Chicago market has 1.3 billion square feet of industrial properties. There's 20,000 companies. There's 8,000 buildings, of which I've cold called 7,000 of them. And there's so much knowledge in having 42 years just targeted that the way that we can do it is by knowing our stuff. That's as opposed to a broker calls me from Omaha and says, hey, I've got an industrial building in Omaha. I said, sorry, I don't know Omaha, and I'm not going to fly there and live there for 42 years and learn it. Yeah. So that's my thing. I mean, I ask real questions and I know real answers and build relationships. I just did a deal with a company recently, and the CFO became a friend of mine. And I said, hey, you should look at this. And he said, I will. And he called me after a long weekend and he said, I read it cover to cover and I'm in. He says, I love it. I'm investing. I said, you like the all cash model? He says, fuck yeah. Because no one else does that. I don't feel safe in anything else I'm doing other than T-bills. And by the way, I keep all of my reserves at the Northern Trust, which I think is a very safe bank, or in T-bills, laddered over the next 30, 60, 90 days. Because again, if the government goes bankrupt, I believe I've made a good decision. I don't need to be ashamed of putting money in T-bills. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I do believe that that's a safe investment for our cash reserves.
Well, Joel, tell us how it is that we can get in touch with you to take advantage of your knowledge, expertise, and wisdom.
My website, which asks, we are risk-averse investors, are you? Is at Brit Properties, BRIT with one T, BritProperties.com. And there's actually an article in there that we wrote in the section about our offerings. It says why you should not invest with us. And anybody who doesn't read that shouldn't invest with us, because it's all the questions that if you and I were business partners and we sat with our smartest investor and they asked the 10 best questions, in this article are the 10 best questions.
Well, wonderful. Well, Joel, you have had mentors, and today you are a mentor. So tell us about your mentorship program.
I've mentored over 70 industrial real estate people. I used to be a full-time industrial real estate broker, and I taught industrial real estate brokers how to go door to door and how to negotiate deals. I built a company with a few other partners, and we had 26 brokers, and we sold the company. And other people in the industry seek me out sometimes. I got a call before you and I were on the phone, and a guy called me from Memphis who's trying to figure out what to do with a building that he's struggling with. I've never met him. It's the second time he's called me to ask if he should make a certain lease that's coming along and what he should do physically to the building in terms of adding truck docks, which are very important in industrial, or adding office or taking some of the office out. And before you and I talked, I gave him, I looked on Google Earth at the map of the building and I gave him my opinion. That's a little mentorship. And I've got a few people who are investors who say, hey, I like the idea of calling on people to see if they want to sell buildings. So some of my investors have become my canvassers to find deals. And I train them by teaching them how. I give them a script. I tell them what to do, and then they call me, and when they're stuck, they call and say, what do I do now? So it's continuous. I'm currently mentoring roughly 7 people in various degrees of mentorship. It's the best thing. It's so fun. You know, you've been in education. You know what I'm talking about. Teaching, the teacher always learns more than the students. So every time I mentor somebody, I'm better off for it, and I hope they are too.
Well, Joel, we are just about out of time here, but You have a unique way of making major decisions. Can you tell us a little bit about that process that you use to make your decisions?
Sure. The most important thing is due diligence. It's asking the questions. Again, it comes back to the same thing. All the billionaires I know are riveting with questions. They want to know answers. They don't assume anything. So I try not to assume anything. And in my investor group, I have 8, what I call them, the brilliant investors who have a lot of experience, and I have them on an advisory board. And when I'm making a major decision, whether to buy a building, whether to sell a building, whether to lease the building, or whether to make a very large expense in the building or the parking lot or whatever, I consult with all 8 of the advisors, often 7 on one call, and then someone wasn't on the call, and I have to call Bruce or I have to call Steve. And I won't make a decision without those smart guys throwing the toughest questions at me that they can come up with. I don't want softballs. I want tough questions. And again, there's no shame after you make a decision when you've done your diligence and you've reached out to the experts and you listen and you analyze. After that, it's in God's hands. It's not in our hands anymore. Sort of like when you hit the golf ball. Once the face of the driver hits the ball, it's in God's hands. You don't know where it's going to go. But until you can work on your swing to make your swing better so the ball goes straighter more often. So that's my golf metaphor. And I believe that's true for real estate. You got to be really smart in ascertaining the details. That's what matters.
That is definitely for sure. And I think it is. And knowing what questions to ask, I think, is one of the biggest challenges out there. And it has taken me a lifetime, I think, to learn that. But asking smart questions, God, that's a huge challenge.
I study with a rabbi
Mm-hmm.
he's an Orthodox rabbi who is just an expert in the Torah, the Old Testament. And he found something in there that he thinks is really important for people like you and like me. And it's the statement that a wise man's question is half the answer.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the solution is always in the question. So,
yeah.
Joel, what a delight it has been to be with you today. And thank you for sharing your ups and downs in life. Truly enjoyed it. Thanks for being with us, Joel.
And thanks to you for the same.
Enlightened investors, wait, don't go just yet. I just want to remind you about our recently launched webinar that you will not want to miss. If you're at all curious and would like to learn more about how real estate investing can diversify your investment portfolio, alleviate the anxiety associated with Wall Street swings, leverage your 401ks and IRAs to substantially increase the return on your investment, and do all of this with turnkey, hands-off passive real estate investments, then you'll want to immediately go to stevetalker.com/webinar. In the webinar, we'll also address the common dubious investment schemes that you want to avoid. To access the webinar, go to stevetalker.com/webinar. I look forward to seeing you in the webinar.
Thank you for tuning in to Real Estate Investing Abundance, brought to you by Steve Talker Capital, a company working for passionate professionals like you to develop financial independence built on solid, passive real estate investments. As part of our efforts to make the world a better place, Steve Talker Capital contributes to activities and organizations committed to better understand the equine. These endeavors attempt to enhance the human treatment of horses worldwide. Steve Talker Capital, working for a world where all creatures, great and small, flourish abundantly. For resources to develop your financial independence, connect with us at stevetalker.com.